Hey there, and welcome. Today, we're jumping into something really cool, a field that connects two things you might not think go together. The world around us, the actual land under our feet, and the very culture that defines who we are. It's a way of looking at the world that tackles one of the biggest questions out there.
And that question is this: why? I mean, really, why are there just so many different cultures all over the world? Think about it. From the super high-tech life in a city like Tokyo to the traditions of a remote Amazonian village, it's an incredible spectrum of human experience. So, what made it that way? What shaped all these unique ways of living? That's the big puzzle we're going to try to piece together.
Well, one really powerful answer comes from a field called ecological anthropology. It really got going back in the 1960s. And the core idea is actually pretty profound when you think about it. It says you simply cannot understand a culture unless you understand its environment. And it's not a one-way thing, it's a two-way street. The ecosystem shapes the society for sure, but then that society turns around and shapes its ecosystem right back.
Okay, so to really get into this, we have to talk about the guy who kind of started it all, the pioneer, Julian Stewart. He was an American anthropologist, and he just wasn't buying the explanations that were common back then. He was looking for something more solid, a new way to really frame how we understand this deep connection between people and their world.
And this is where things get really interesting. Stewart brought about a huge shift in thinking. See, before him, most anthropologists looked at the environment as, well, basically a set of limits. The environment just limited what was possible. But Stewart came along and said, whoa, hang on, that's only half the picture. He argued that the environment doesn't just limit us, it actively stimulates us. It throws challenges our way that force us to innovate and adapt. It's not just a wall, it's a launch pad for creativity.
Stewart's whole goal here was to make anthropology feel more, scientific. He wanted a system. So in his big 1955 book, Theory of Culture Change, he laid out this method he called cultural ecology. And the idea was simple but powerful. Let's systematically study how different groups adapt to their specific environments. This gave anthropologists a real framework for tracking and understanding how cultures change over time.
So Stewart basically kicked the door open, and right behind him, a whole new generation of thinkers just rushed in. They took his foundational ideas and ran with them in some really exciting directions. They started thinking about things like the flow of energy, the real purpose of rituals, and looking at the whole environment and the people in it as one big interconnected system.
Take Leslie White, for instance. He was another huge name in this, and he had this incredibly powerful way of looking at things. For him, the engine driving all of culture was just one thing: energy. His point was, the better a society gets at capturing and using energy from its environment, whether that's from sunlight or plants or hunting animals, the more complex its culture can become. More energy means more complex technology, social structures, you name it.
Then you've got another anthropologist, Marvin Harris, who really zoomed in on one specific type of energy: food energy. He basically saw all of human history as a series of steps up a ladder. Each step was a more intense, more efficient way of getting food. So you start with hunting and gathering, then move to early farming, all the way up to modern industry. And each one of those steps wasn't just a new way to eat, it was a massive leap in energy capture that totally transformed the culture.
And then there's Roy Rappaport, and his work is just fascinating, because he looked at something you'd think has nothing to do with this: rituals. He did this famous study of a group in New Guinea, the Simbaga Meringue, and they had these huge pig feasting rituals. Now, on the surface, it's a religious ceremony, right? But Rappaport realized it was actually a genius ecological balancing act. The timing of the feasts controlled the pig population, making sure they didn't eat up all the local resources. It's this perfect example of how something that looks purely symbolic can have a super practical, real-world function.
So, up to this point, we've been talking about all these American anthropologists who really defined the field in the 50s and 60s. But what if I told you that the main idea, this deep connection between land and culture, was actually bubbling up somewhere totally different and way, way earlier?
Check out this timeline. It tells a really surprising story. Almost 20 years, a full 2 decades before Julian Stewart published his big book in the US, a Brazilian sociologist named Gilberto Frei published a book called Nordeste. And what did he do in it? Exactly what ecological anthropologists would do later. He showed how one single plant, sugarcane, completely shaped everything in northeast Brazil: the land, the economy, the social structure, the entire culture. He was so ahead of his time, a real pioneer of this way of thinking, long before it even had a name in American academia. Okay, so that's a quick trip through the history of this academic idea. But so what? Why does any of this matter to us today, right now? What's the real takeaway here?
Honestly, this way of thinking has never been more relevant. It helps us see the cultural roots of our climate crisis, that it isn't just a science problem, it's a problem of our values and habits. It also shines a huge spotlight on the importance of indigenous knowledge, from groups who have figured out how to live sustainably in their environments for centuries. And maybe most importantly, it's a huge warning sign. It tells us that when our environment changes, you can bet our societies are going to change right along with it in ways we might not expect.
And that really brings us to the final thought, the big idea to leave you with. The main lesson here is that we're locked in this constant feedback loop with our planet. Our culture drives our actions, and those actions shape our environment. But then that new, changed environment, well, it turns right around and shapes the culture of the future, the world our kids and grandkids will inherit. So it leaves us with a pretty heavy question, doesn't it? If our culture is shaping our environment, what kind of future are we building right now?